You hate everything about the status quo. What would you do to fix it?
I thought I just said what I would do to fix it. I don't say I hate everything about the status quo, but I think we're in great trouble. And I think I've answered that by invoking Article 5. It can be done, and the point is the status quo will not allow it to be done. I'm perfectly practical about that. It suits nobody. After all, if you got into office under this system, you certainly don't want the system changed, do you? But what I see down the road is real violence and the deterioration of the society. What is happening in Yugoslavia, what is happening in the Soviet Union can certainly happen here. People are broke. There is no money. The banks fail. What I'm saying is there is one sort of legal way. There's one way to, okay, we will hear you. We will listen to you. We will actually give you representative government. That's my solution.
Has America lost the will to be socially conscious, or is it simply a matter of waiting for the proper leader to articulate the need for such consciousness?
I'm not much of a believer in the leader makes all the difference. You know, I was around here when Franklin Roosevelt came in, and he was lucky, the country was lucky, we were richer, we were stronger then than we are now, basically, and we almost got out of the Depression. However, it was the Second World War that really got us out of it. I don't think a leader makes the slightest bit of difference. What's wrong is systemic. When a system is all wrong, what difference does it make whom you hire for president? I mean, the banks that put Mr. Bush in and the oil companies, they told him to do one thing, lower the capital gains. And that's the only thing he knows. He just keeps going on about that. Change the system, not the man.
Do the people who voted for Reagan twice and Bush have a right to complain about the economy today?
The Germans call that Schadenfreude, taking joy in the pain of others. Well, they deserve it, yes, I must say. I am disagreeable enough if they voted for those three elections. But remember that half the people don't vote at all, and they're not apathetic. They know it's pointless. I haven't voted for president since 1964, when I voted for Lyndon Johnson, the peace candidate. I have never voted since. I will never be had again. I am not alone. So when they say, oh, Reagan was so popular, well, he wasn't. Every one of his policies, if you ask the people about them, they didn't like them. And as it was, one out of four voted for him. 1 out of 4 voted for the other guy. And half weren't there at all. So, 25% of the country is hardly a mandate. Well.
If you were president, as you might have been, how would you solve the economic problems of this country? Would you cut foreign imports drastically?
No, I wouldn't cut foreign imports. You put on the table, as Mr. Darman said the other Sunday, you put on the table the Pentagon budget. I noticed that SDI got through again $90 billion, and foreign aid. The first presidential candidate who gets up and says, I'm going to stop all foreign aid, will be an enormous response from the folks out there. There's enough money at home, and then we're giving money to other countries. I would certainly, why not? I mean, why not make a conscious effort to get Boeing and Lockheed and Northrop, who by and large control the delegation of my state of California, to Congress. They finance most of them. Why not get them to shift over to mass transit? I mean, if you make a bomber that doesn't fly, presumably, like the B-1, presumably you can make a train, which we hope will go. But why not transfer over? Use that money for things that will repair the infrastructure of the country.
How much damage will the David Duke candidacy do to our country?
No man who has had a chin implant can be all bad. That takes guts, I mean, there's a lot of plastic surgery going on in the higher ranks of politics, but a chin implant is a sign of great seriousness. I mean, don't turn your back on a chin like that, if I'm not mixing metaphors. Well, he will certainly, since Bush got elected as a racist candidate the last time, the Willie Horton ads, and he's forever sending out anti-black messages, which is the way he keeps his peculiar coalition together. Duke will get him out in the open. Oh, I'm told that Patrick Buchanan is going to declare today. So that was the word I heard this morning. All I can say is the last time we had a President Buchanan, we had the Civil War.
Speaking of Mr. Buchanan, this questioner says, a few years ago you were in deep controversy with neoconservatives, a long line similar to Pat Buchanan's ongoing feud with the same group. Do you now continue to hold these views, and do you see any intellectual kinship between yourself and Mr. Buchanan?
Well, I hope not, but you can't tell. I mean, if William Buckley comes out for legalizing all drugs, as I have done, you know, even people on the wrong side do the right thing occasionally. My wars with the neoconservatives are at the moment at idle rest, but they may start again. I dared to criticize Israel, which of course cannot be done. And if it's a sharp criticism, you are attacked as an anti-Semite, which is like being called a cannibal. You know, how do you prove you're not really a cannibal? You'd say, well, I never ate any. That doesn't mean you don't want to eat somebody. Well, no, I mean, and a great many people have been smeared by these radical neoconservatives in the interest of their spiritual homeland, and I think it's been a great mischief, and I wish they would cut it out. It's one of the reasons I quoted H.L. Mencken. At least I got him off the hook.
Given your theory of corporate fascism, how do you explain Bush's willingness last fall to increase taxes on the wealthy and on corporations?
What Mr. Bush does on taxes is just a light show. I mean, it makes no sense at all. He does something different every day. I'll give you a meaningful, we're talking about the economy again. 30 years ago, something like 48% of federal revenues came from income tax, from individuals. And about the same amount, 46-7%, came from corporations. We are still paying 47-48%. Corporations are now paying 10%. That is what has happened in the last 30 years. Corporations pay no tax. I think they should be taxed, but every time that's brought up, you're accused of being communist. So, but now that communism is over, maybe we can tax corporations, because if we don't, there's no revenue.
If this is a pre-revolutionary era, what form will the revolution take if it comes?
The interesting thing about revolutions is nobody ever knows what it's going to take. I mean, what form it will take. I think we see a lot of it right now. The fact that the inner cities are, if not rioting, are dangerous for the people who live there, dangerous for visitors. One of the few interesting pieces I've ever come across in the New York Times, my unfavorite newspaper, but they had a very good piece in the magazine section on how 20% of the population, 1/5 of the people, had absolutely split from the rest of the country, and those are the rich, living behind guards with TV monitors, special security. That's 1/5 of a nation has just removed itself from the problems of the 4/5. That's very dangerous and very tempting to people who have nothing. I mean, I walked the other day from Willard's Hotel to the Capitol, and aside from what now looks like a Disneyland federal theme park, not the Washington of my day, but anyway, walking along, it was like bombed out East Berlin, and I thought, this is the capital of a world empire? I mean, you don't see a city in this shape anywhere in Europe. And I have a house south of Naples. Naples isn't this bad. Don't think they won't get restive. They will. What form it will take, I don't want to think.
What changes would your new Constitution include?
Well, I would certainly put the executive back in his box, and perhaps something more like a parliamentary system where you might have an ornamental president with some powers, and then you would have a chief of a party, whoever gets a majority, in Congress would then be a de facto like a prime minister. I think that might be useful. He could then be questioned. I mean, you know, there's a whole generation that has grown up thinking that presidents are always standing below helicopters saying, "What was that? What was that?"
You have written historical novels that touched on just about every era of American history. What are you planning to examine next?
Well, I think I've done 6 of these, and I think now I will look back. I have lived through 2/3 of the 20th century, and I've lived through 1/3 of the life of the American Republic, and I was brought up by my grandfather, who was born in 1870, so between the two of us, that's about half the history. So I thought I would look back on it from the present day as myself, over the country as I've seen it, and perhaps have some fictional characters. And then I want to zero in on 45 to 50, which we thought was a golden age. It was all the arts were going. For once we were not at war. The Depression was over. But the irony was that the national security state was being founded, and we didn't know about it. In fact, the actual decree, National Security Council, I think it's number 68, which gives the blueprint for it, did not become public knowledge until 1971 under the Freedom of Information Act. So I'd like to tell how on the one hand we were dancing on the deck, and down below in the engine room something awful was happening.
Will you do a volume on the Reagan-Bush era?
I leave that to the great talents of a historian far greater than I, Kitty Kelley.
This questioner would like to know, has Kitty Kelley ever tried to write your life?
I don't think I'd be interesting to Kitty Kelley, but I've met her a couple of times, and I occur in at least one of her books, and every reference to me is almost right. But she never bothers to pick up a phone, you know, to check it, so it's always just a little bit wrong. But she's great.
Whom do you enjoy reading?
Well, I like Bush's State of the Unions. You know, there isn't much comic writing since S.J. Perlman died, and his press conferences are funnier, but the State of the Union, 1,000 Points of Light, that was the previous administration, but they're all kind of, those things are fun. My favorite writer of my lifetime has been Italo Calvino. I highly recommend him to you.
How is a reader of novelized biography to distinguish between fact and speculation? Shouldn't the difference be made clear?
Well, that's a very good point. I was just up at Dartmouth for a week, and I sat in with an American history class. They'd all been assigned my book, Lincoln, so they've written pieces about it, about 70 of them. And they asked me if I read historical novels. I said, no, I never do. I read history. And they said, well, why don't you? I said, for the same reason that most people don't much care for them, because what's true and what isn't? If you don't, you know, is he making it up or did this really happen? And one girl there said something quite interesting. She said, I loved Burr, whatever it was, 1876, I guess, but then I get to the end of it and I find out that President Martin Van Buren is the illegitimate son of Aaron Burr. And I felt the whole thing just went out the window, because I said, well, he probably was. And she said, well, what do you base it on? I said, well, John Quincy Adams, well-known gossip of the period, wrote in his diary that he was in the Senate, and Senator Van Buren from New York came to take his oath of office, and he said, Aaron Burr's natural son, looking like a fair version of his dreadful father, has arrived here in Washington. I think, though, I got an idea at Dartmouth. I think I'm going to get some graduate students to go through and do footnotes. So I'm not making it up.
How can you be so sure that our so-called corporate overlords would not manipulate a constitutional convention convened through the state legislatures?
Well, I'm not sure at all. The state of California is full of referenda that are forever being twisted around. do you not want, non-smoking smoking, I mean, by the time the cigarette companies have finished with it, and Jesse Helms has done the final polish to it, you can't tell. Of course they will be busy, but there'll be a lot of other people busy too. I mean, in every Eden there is a serpent, but kill it.
The British government is currently investigating the Maxwell companies for precisely the same asset-shifting card tricks the President employs each year in his budget message. Is the U.S. going to go overboard too?
I wish I'd said that, but then I will. But to another audience.
There are those who believe the goal of the present administration is to transform the republic into an oligarchy. Do you think this is so? If so, will it succeed?
I don't think this government has any real plans about anything except, day-to-day survival. The country has always been an oligarchy, and probably always will be. That is the nature of politics. When they were cooking up the Constitution at Philadelphia, Madison addressed himself to that because somebody brought up, well, what happens, when there are 100 million people in the country, which means you would have several hundred people in the House of Representatives. It's too big, it's too unwieldy. How would you get any work done? And Madison said, it is an eternal law. It is an iron law of oligarchy, that in every society only a few maneuver it and manipulate it. So you can count on that for good or ill.
Do you share the suspicion that investigations into the October surprise and other matters will of necessity lead nowhere because of careful handling so as not to lead to impeachments?
I don't think we'll ever see an impeachment again, since it is now, I think, somewhere written into the Constitution that no one is accountable for anything. So that's all out. I thought Reagan probably should have been for a number of reasons, but I think they probably got the October surprise pretty well handled, and I don't think anybody will be nailed. But if they do, what are you going to do? There is no law, really. Everybody seems to be outside of it. Or the new thing now, my friend Barrett Prettyman will instruct me later in it, but the plea bargain. If you committed a crime with 4 others, they torture one of the 4, and then he submits, he speaks against you, and you go to prison, he stays out. That seems to be the new way of doing it. So I rather suspect that for the October surprise, somebody will be sacrificed. Personally, I believe in it. I do believe that in order to get elected, that gang would do anything, but so would the other side.
Since you have come out for legalizing drugs, what do you suggest we do to break through and accomplish this?
Well, legalize means just what I say, legalize. Drugs sold at cost, I think heroin would be about 5 cents. You certainly would money on instruction, just as we don't try not to sell bottles of vodka to 9-year-olds. You wouldn't sell heroin to them. The important thing is to remove the profit motive. Once there's no profit in flogging drugs with the young or with anybody, then crime is out of it. That eliminates not only mafia, big crime, but it also eliminates the guy who knocks the old lady on the head in order to get money for a fix. Just legalize it. I've never seen a country like, Europe just shakes its head with wonder at us. Now, we have laws against everything. I mean, we go into private behavior in a way that is undreamed of in the rest of the first world. They have some laws against drugs. By and large, it's the Drug Enforcement Agency, my favorite name. What does it mean, as usual? Drug enforcement, they enforce you to take drugs is what it means, so that they can then play cops and robbers and get big appropriations. They're going around Europe now making people change their laws and do this and do that to conform to our idiocies. Drugs have been around forever. Some people will always get hooked. Some people will die of it, and, well, that's their choice. Same with alcohol, same with cigarettes. What on earth is this fuss about? Where's the money to fight this war on drugs? And I love the bellicose language, wars and czars. It's nuts.
Do you honestly believe that Larry Tisch Kay Graham or John Curley or their boards of directors have any influence whatsoever on what stories appear in the news or how they are presented?
It doesn't work like that. Yes, of course they do have enormous influence if they want to use it. What happens is when you have a ruling establishment, you have your job as managing editor because you will think the same way the publisher does, who in turn will think the same way the advertisers or whoever is the ownership that's involved. You're in place and you know what to do. You don't have to be told what to do. So the head of the New York Times, President of the United States, head of CBS, will all have pretty much the same response to anything that comes up. That's why we have the prep schools, to one of which I went. These are training places, Exeter and Andover, that was for the boys of good family without money who would have to hustle, like George Bush and me. The ones who had money would go to Groton and St. Mark's, and they would be given hobbies so that they wouldn't grow up to be wastrels. But those schools condition you to think in a certain fashion. So my friend Kay does not have to ring up anybody unless it's a big policy decision of some kind, like which nullity to support for president. They're there because they think alike, and that is what a ruling class is.
Is there anyone now running for president you could support, or at least in your mind, is there someone who would do the least harm?
Oh, how can you tell? I mean, there's no way of getting to know them. And since one of the proposals I've been making for 30 years, you can see how well I've done with it, was to make it impossible to give money to candidates, by and large, only small amounts, and then to provide them with free time on television and on radio and in the press. This would mean, let's say in a presidential campaign, that you couldn't buy those 30-second spots. That would be out. What you would have then is the candidates would be grilled by journalists, by their mother-in-law, whoever. You really get to see them as they are, instead of as these sort of, well, cosmetic ads is really, in a sense, what they are. You would then know, at least, you'd have an idea, can the guy think, what's he thinking about, what's in his head? Now I don't know any of them, you don't know any of them, we will never know any of them, unless you're a personal friend.
For many years you have lived in Italy, a country of political cynics. Is that why you feel at home there?
There's a lot to be said for Italian cynicism, but actually I don't live in, I live in Los Angeles too, so you could argue I don't live at all in the United States, but I have a lovely quote here which I didn't use. It's from Giolitti, who was quite a good cynical statesman. And he said, "There is a fatal law that makes every reactionary government seek a diversion abroad." That's Italian cynicism.
Before asking the last question, I'd like to thank you so much for being here. We have a certificate of appreciation and a National Press Club mug.
I got a medallion last time.
The questioner wants to know, when are you taking over your own network talk show?
Well, I'm rather kept off the networks for about 20 years because I don't know why, I don't seem politically correct. I thought everything I say is so reasonable, but they don't seem to want to hear it. But I'm having lunch with Peter Jennings tomorrow, and he said ABC wants to ask you a question, so you might be seeing me soon.